It is time to make a chocolate babka, and I'm so pleased that Live with Anna Olson today is here because of Rolling Meadow Farms. They do fantastic dairy products, which I'm working into today's recipe. Absolutely delicious. Which reminds me, I need to warm up my milk. So, a babka dough is very much a sweet yeast dough. And so that family of doughs, think of doughs that you use to make a cinnamon bun, a sticky bun, not quite brioche, that French style bread, which is more about the butter than the eggs. This has a little more sugar to it, but a bit of egg and a bit of butter to it to make it nice and rich. Now, what makes a regular dough, a bread dough, which is typically made of flour, yeast, water, and salt, and develops a crust to it. By using milk in place of the water, that will ensure that you get a thin crust and it's a soft crust. There are milk sugars in milk, and that promotes a nice golden brown. So you'll notice, even if you're just making soft dinner rolls, if you use milk in place of water, you won't get that hard, tough crust, and you'll get a nice, even golden brown color. So I need 3/4 of a cup, or 375 ml. And I'm using whole milk. That's what we call it here in Canada. So 3.5 to 3.8%. You could use 2%, which is sometimes called partly skimmed or semi-skimmed milk. That can work just fine. You could even bring it down to a 1%, a low-fat milk. What I will say is don't use a skim milk with no fat in it, because you might as well use water. And if you were to use it at that point, well, then you would end up with a bread that does have too much of a crust to it. So I'm just going to pop this into a little sauce pot. I don't think you can see it over here, Michael, but it's not a concern. Believe me, there's nothing exciting happening over here. I'm just putting it on low heat because the key is to activate the yeast. You want all of your ingredients at the very minimum room temperature or slightly warmer. And so that reminds me, I better pull out my cream cheese. Be ready. There we go. And the reason for that is yeast thrives at the same temperature we thrive at. So think of body temperature or slightly warmer. And that is the temperature that fully activates your yeast, getting the growth, developing the flavors, and getting the texture you want out of your bread. Now, I have already measured my 3 cups or 450 grams of all-purpose flour into my mixing bowl, and I've got a lot of topics to really hit upon. So Nancy, you wrote earlier, and Nancy's from Niagara Falls, New York. Guess what? My mom grew up in Niagara Falls, New York. I think I can see you right over there, over the border. We can't cross the border these days, but hopefully sometime soon. And sadly, I don't have my bakery here anymore in Niagara, but I am out and about and around. So when you're allowed to cross, coming to the farmers markets, I think are absolutely fabulous here. But back to your question, you were asking about the flour. I do prefer to use unbleached flour in my baking in general, because the less treated it is, the more control I have over it. And when I'm creating recipes, I like to have that control. Also, for a sweet dough like this, you don't have to use a bread flour, which has a higher protein content, which kind of can toughen up, where we want a certain tenderness to this dough. And so all-purpose is absolutely fine here. And it is more readily available. So to this, I'm going to add my 2 tablespoons, 25 grams of granulated sugar, because it is a bit of a sweet dough. And you could use this dough for a cinnamon bun recipe if you wanted to. I'm adding my 1 teaspoon, 5 ml of salt, and then I'm just going to use my finger to give it a little stir in. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm adding my yeast to the flour, and this is an instant dry yeast, which means you don't have to dissolve it in liquid. But I don't want the yeast to be in direct contact with the salt, so that when I add the liquid, the salt and the yeast are dissolving at the same time, because salt tempers the activity. It slows the activity of the yeast. You're at risk of damaging the yeast, so you don't get that full lift. So that's why I worked in the salt, but this dry yeast goes on top. Now, the measurement may seem odd, by volume, 2¼ teaspoons. It's 7 grams by weight. And the reason for that amount, I try and develop recipes according to what are common package ingredients. And if you buy yeast by the packet, a packet is 7 grams or 2¼ teaspoons. But if you're like me and you're baking a lot of yeast breads these days, well, I just buy bulk. I buy the larger amounts and then just weigh or measure it out. Now, if you're using regular dry yeast, you can tell the difference visually. Instant yeast has a really fine granule to it. Regular dry yeast has almost a pearl. They've got little round pearls. And so they need to be dissolved in the milk. So what you would do is my milk, which is now, I'm just going to test it. You don't need to use a thermometer with your milk. I use a knuckle, just like testing a baby bottle, or you can put some on your wrist. If it's just above body temperature, the ideal temperature is 115 Fahrenheit or 46 Celsius. But so long as you can feel the warmth, if you can't feel it, it's body temperature. If you can feel the warmth, you know it's just above. So back to the yeast. If you were dissolving regular dry yeast, you would put it in the warm milk at this point and just let it sit for a minute or two. A while ago, yeast was not as stable as it is. So you had to make sure you saw bubbles rising to the surface before you use it. These days, it's fine. So long as it has a minute or two to dissolve in the milk, then you can add it to your pot with everything. Now, a couple of you, including Lopez and Mattia, were asking about using fresh yeast. Now, fresh yeast is harder to find in grocery stores. A lot of commercial bakers like it because it can lend a bigger yeasty flavor and you get a bigger lift from it. If you have access to it, I'd say go for it. The measurement is always double whatever the dry measurement. So because this calls for 7 grams of dry yeast, you would use 14 grams of fresh. Now that too, you have to crumble into the liquid. You break it into pieces, let it sit for a minute to dissolve, give it a stir, add it to the milk. So the choice is yours. I'm going to also add a single egg to this Babka dough recipe.
I love the smell of fresh yeast.
Yeah, fresh yeast has a beautiful aroma where a dry or instant yeast takes the activation to really get going and get that smell going. But your proof time does not change. Now, early days, people would say, oh, well, you don't need to use as much instant yeast as dry yeast when making a recipe. For recipes of this scale, making a single loaf, even 2 loaves, there's not a tangible difference. If you're working in a commercial bakery and you've got a recipe that's making 20 loaves, then yes, there does become a difference at this point. But I use dry yeast and instant dry yeast in a 1-to-1 equivalency. Now, we had another question from Angela before I start mixing the dough, who was asking about could you use anything other than yeast because she's allergic. Now, I don't know if you're allergic just to commercially produced yeast or if it's yeast in general. If you were to use another leavener like baking powder, baking soda, you wouldn't get the right texture or feel, and you wouldn't get the stretch and pull to be able to twist the babka, which is its signature look. If you can handle natural airborne yeasts, I recommend making your own starter. You would want to use water because dairy could spoil sitting on the counter, but you would simply create equal parts by weight, water and flour, and add just a touch of honey to the mixture and let that sit on the counter for 24 hours. Give it a stir. Add another equal amount of water and water and flour to get it going. Let it sit another 24 hours, and within 2 days, maybe even 3, you should have a natural starter that you would then sub out those equal amounts of liquid and flour into this recipe to replace it, and you should get that leavening. So I hope that answers your questions. Now I'm going to start stirring my mixture, but I want to get my butter and cream cheese measured before I turn on the mixer because then it's going to just simply be difficult to hear me. So I need half a cup, 115 grams of butter, and the same, 125 grams of cream cheese. And now we had a lot of questions here. So I'm going to just weigh my butter and my cream cheese together so I can add them once the dough starts mixing. I like to mix the dough until you almost see the flour almost fully incorporated. Then I start adding the butter and the cream cheese. That helps really liquefy the flour, giving it a nice stretchiness. You're going to see it makes a very soft dough, and I know a number of you commented as earlier in this thread before we got going about how you've tried this recipe and were surprised how sticky it is at the beginning. And you might be tempted to add more flour, but resist the temptation, because I can tell you quite plainly, and it was Hermione, I think you said, you mix it for 5 minutes and all of a sudden, poop, those proteins, the glutens develop and it becomes stretchy and elastic. It will always be soft because of the sugar in there, and that gives the babka its distinctive texture and flavor once we're done. There we go. I've got enough there. And I'll just spoon out my cream cheese. I'm using soft tub cream cheese. You could use firmer. Just again, make sure you're bringing it up to room temperature. Just make sure I'm on my, there we go. I'm on grams. Nice big pieces. Now, a lot of you were asking, why on earth do I use cream cheese? And that's not typical to a babka recipe, but it is a style of rich dough that I like to use quite often when I'm making cinnamon buns or sticky buns, and I found that the flavor in this babka recipe is just absolutely fantastic. It marries well with the sweet cinnamon filling and the chocolate that I add to it, and it brings up a good point. What is a babka and what's different about it that compared to a cinnamon bun or anything else? Now, a babka is a Jewish style of yeast bread that is baked in a loaf and it's twisted with its fillings. And so that gives it a distinctive shape and texture. It is less cinnamony than a cinnamon bun. I use a third of the amount of cinnamon in my babka as I do anything else, but you can add other fillings. Chocolate, so the original babka originated in Eastern Europe, but now it's around the world, and the addition of chocolate was a North American addition, and it's really hard to find a North American babka without chocolate in it, but you can get inventive with what you choose to add to it. There is also another type of babka. It's simply called a Polish babka, so it's not part of the Jewish baking tradition, and it's a different style, and it's often baked in a tall pan or a bundt style pan, and it is a rich dough again, but it typically has dried fruits, maybe some candied peel in it, and often brandy or rum. So that's the same word, which means little grandmother, but essentially very, very different styles of a soft, rich dough bread. Okay, look at my yeast is already bubbling away. I better get this dough mixing because we've got other things to do. I've got to roll and twist this dough too. So off we go. I'm going to mix it, add my ingredients, and we'll take a look at the dough as we're working through it. Hello, Gourmet La. You're supposed to be on a conference call, but you're watching, you've got it on mute while you're watching me. Shh, I won't tell anyone. Oh, Lourdes would like me to repeat the difference between the dry yeast. I will, once we stop the mixer, if I can do that. Oh, someone watching from Poland. So you know the difference between that style of babka, and there's paska, the Easter breads too, and this Jewish style of the twisted, filled soft bread. Very different. Hello from London, Dominican Republic. Kathy, good question. I don't know the Polish name of the Polish babka. I do remember the Pascha, which of course means Easter, the Pascha version, but I don't know what the Polish word is for the other one. But we have someone writing from Poland, so if you could tell us, that'd be great. And Romania has one too. All right, and there's no Easter or Christmas without it. Thank you, Mattia. And you were the one who was asking about the fresh versus dry yeast. Hello from Chile. Jacob, poppy seeds. That's a good idea, but you didn't like the flavor that much. They have a distinctive flavor. You could also use nuts if you wanted to, or you could work jam into the filling. What's that?
Babka Wilkanocha.
Wilkanocha?
Wilkanocha.
Oh, I'm sure we're not pronouncing this appropriately.
Wilkanocha.
There we go. I'm just helping my mixer along here. There we go. Just getting those wet ingredients. Why wait for the mixer? You can do this by hand, most definitely, because it is such a soft dough. It's easy to handle. Now, this is not the type of dough like a country bread or an Italian bread that you would tip out onto the counter and knead by hand. It is too sticky. So a tool, like a bowl scraper like this, becomes a bit of a paddle in your hand. So if you're mixing it by hand in the bowl, you really want to kind of stretch it and slap it around a little bit until you get that elastic texture. So now that my flour is absorbed, I'm working in my cream cheese and butter pieces. And it's probably going to be a little noisier. So back to the cream cheese. I like the taste and texture that the cream cheese adds to this recipe. I know a couple of you pointed out that cream cheese is not your deal, and I totally respect that. Just replace it with more butter. It'll be a slightly richer dough. So even though it calls for 125 grams of cream cheese, I would not replace it with a full 125 grams of butter. I would say let's round it off at 100. Add 100 more grams of butter if you're not using the cream cheese. So I will have to get in there in my bowl. And you might have to do this too. Scrape it down because that butter is kicking off to the side. And see how sticky the dough is? And you're thinking, oh, I should add more flour. Don't add more flour. Don't. Let me take a look at the questions here. Lucy is asking, can you use a flax egg in this recipe? I think you could. In fact, though, because you would see the speckle of it, I prefer using flax egg when I'm making things like muffins, banana bread, cookies, simple cakes. For something like this, where you want to see the beauty of this beautiful light fluffy dough, I would use 60 grams of silken tofu whisked until it's smooth in place of the egg here to give you that binding capacity and the richness. And I think you'll find you get the sets. And I do that with when I'm making a vanilla cake or anything where I don't want to see the speckle of the flax seeds. So great question, Lucy. Very good. And, oh, we're talking about AP flour. That is a good point. I don't know the person's name. Canadian all-purpose flour usually has a 10 to 12% protein content. That is correct. So that's a very good point. But it's not advertised on our packaging. You don't know. We just have our basic varieties, all-purpose. In the UK, it would be called plain flour. You have your cake and pastry flour, which has a lower protein, and your bread, which has a higher protein content. Rolando's asking, could I add some raisins? You certainly could. That would fit, and you would work it into the filling, not into the dough itself, and we'll get there. Hello from Pakistan and India. Oh, and Sharifa, I did not forget about that profiterole craquelin recipe. Actually, because I'm in process developing the recipe now, I was going to test it over the weekend with 3 different fillings. I was going to do a pistachio filling, a raspberry filling, and a vanilla bean filling. But what I have to do is after I test the recipe, then I send it to my 2 recipe testers, and they have to make it, and I send them no information. I give them no photos, no tips, no cheat notes, and then they produce based on my instructions, send back to me, we evaluate, I edit the recipe, and then it'll be ready for you. So you have to give me a little time there. My recipe testers have to do a little work before I am ready to share the recipe with you. So now, let's look at this dough.
Can you bring the mixer forward just by 6 inches?
I can certainly bring the mixer forward by 6 inches. There we go. So we're developing, I'm going to take it off the hook, a really nice stretchiness to here. But I'm just going to give it 1 more minute. But you can see it's sticking to the bowl, it's sticking to my hands, it's soft, it's warm to the touch, but that's exactly how it should be. So just another moment here. And because the dough is so soft and tender, you can mix it on a higher speed because there's no resistance. You're not going to hurt the motor if you're using a mixer. If you're using an electric beater with the dough hook attachments. This dough suits that very well. And your timing, if mixing it by hand, is not that much greater. And there was another good question earlier from Sally, who was asking if you have a bigger batch of dough, do you need to knead it longer? And it counts when you're really making a big batch of dough, like in a commercial bakery, but ultimately it's the motion combined with the time that does the trick on developing those glutens. And so just because you have a double recipe does not mean double the kneading time. All right, we've got some nice stretchy elastics. Like it actually looks like elastic bands pulling away from the side of the mixer. So we are absolutely fine here. And I'm going to scrape this into my bowl. I don't bother greasing my bowls when I put bread doughs in them now because, well, they stick anyhow. But this tool is really handy to get everything you want out. There we go. And now, just a quick little, get that dough off my hand. It's not as sticky as some. I will cover this with plastic later. And I've got one already done and ready here. And now I imagine I'll have to move the mixer back, Michael, so you can see. All right, we're good. Now this is where you need to be a little bit patient. It does take 90 minutes for this dough to proof up. Whenever a dough has sugar in it, because it's a complex sugar versus using honey, or sometimes you see bread recipes call for molasses, those are simple sugars. And the yeast feeds on them and it breaks it down faster and generates the carbon dioxide faster. But when you have sugar, the sugar has to break down one step before the yeast can feed on it. And then, so it just, doughs with sugar take a little bit longer to proof up. And they don't always double in volume because you've got the weight of ingredients like the eggs and the butter there, where a regular yeast dough without those has nothing else but the flour to in between the air bubbles of carbon dioxide it's producing. And look at the CO2 at work here under the plastic wrap. Now the habit I have is just because, I don't know about you, but I can get a little distracted or I'm doing multiple things in the kitchen. I always mark my time on my plastic. So I know when I put the dough in the bowl, so I know when to check it. Or I can even put the time on it, or you set your timer. But usually I have multiple bowls of doughs and things going. So I know it's time to check this dough. Now, Cherry was asking about proofing the dough overnight. You could do this. I would tell you to leave it out for about half an hour just to let the warmth you've already created with your ingredients, activating the yeast, to go at it, and then you could put it in the fridge. And because the cold temperature slows down the fermentation, it doesn't stop it, but then you can use overnight to let that dough proof. You would work with it cold to roll it and fill it, but then you would really have to let it rise longer after you've twisted it to warm it up and let it come to a comparable room temperature. So keep that in mind. So you can make it the day ahead, but then you have to really let it come up. Where after I filled it, I let it rise for 45 minutes. You'll at least want to double that. So we've got our dough, but before I tip it out, I want to make the filling. So if I'm making cinnamon buns with the same scale of dough, I would be using probably half a cup of butter, a full cup of light brown sugar, and a tablespoon of cinnamon. That's kind of my standard ratio for a cinnamon bun filling. With this recipe, I'm going to, where did I put my scale? There we go. It's a less of a filling. The dough really is the dominant flavor, and then because I'm adding the chocolate to it, we don't have to overwhelm it. If I used half a cup of butter and a full cup of sugar, this would become so sticky, it would make a mess of my pan, the loaf wouldn't hold together, and we'd spend more time doing dishes than anything else. And I'd like to spend more of my time baking. So we've got a quarter cup, so 60 grams of unsalted butter. and half a cup or 100 grams of granulated sugar. So that's a big difference. With a cinnamon bun, you use brown sugar. You kind of want that caramelized flavor, where this babka recipe is more about the clarity of this beautiful dough flavor with a hint of cinnamon. So granulated sugar you could use instead. And you could use different sugars if you want, or someone was asking, I think it was Jacob, was asking about using xylitol. If there are other baking related sweetening products, you could use that here. Just stay away from anything liquid because, as I said, it would just make a mess. And in goes my teaspoon of cinnamon, and we'll just give this a little stir. Easy enough to do by hand. The butter's at room temperature. And now someone had asked if I can about recapping the dry yeast. So you've got the two basic styles. It's just simply called dry yeast or dry activated yeast, and instant or quick rise yeast. The quick rise or instant yeast is a smaller granule, and you can add it directly to your dry ingredients. The regular yeast, you have to dissolve in the liquid for a minute or two at a slightly warm temperature before you add it to your flour and mix it. That is essentially the difference. We've got all right, I'm trying to catch your questions as I can, but of course I have to cook and talk and answer your questions. TJ brought up a good point on the thread that the best way to get your questions answered during the conversation, I've been recapping people's names, is when we post this live stream, because we'll have another one next Friday, we'll post it a day ahead. You've got an opportunity within that day, and I check right just an hour before we go on. TJ and I check the list and I look at those questions and I make note of them. So this is high tech here. I have them written down so I don't forget them and I know what's important to you, and this really helps me connect to you. Okay, so because I do my best to get to the screen, but I'm multitasking right now. JT mixed the part about mixing the salt at the beginning. I mix the salt at the beginning before I add the yeast to the dough, so the salt does not come in direct contact with the yeast, because salt slows fermentation. It, potentially, when the liquid's added, if the two are combined so close together, the salt could actually kill the yeast. So that's the reason we do it ahead of time. And Zara, you want to be an announcer your name? Hello! I'm just putting this off to the side. And then the other thing I want to do before I start rolling the dough is to chop my chocolate. I have 4 ounces, 120 grams of chocolate. And you could use chocolate chips here. I prefer using baking chips, and normally when I made the triple chocolate cheesecake, I buy my baking chocolate in callet or chip form, so I don't have to chop it. But I find for a babka, there's something about the chopped chocolate, and because you get those fine chocolatey crumbs, it works better into the filling. So this is baking chocolate, semi-sweet, and I'm just gonna roughly chop it. So you have some big pieces, but then you have those nice little crumbly bits, so you get a good even layer. There we go. I did not secure my cutting board. Shame on me. All right. Professor Michael Olson is writing me up. In case you didn't know, my husband, Michael, is a culinary instructor at Niagara College here, so he teaches the next generation of chefs. So we're constantly talking about food, basically all the time. If we're not cooking it or eating it, we're talking about it, or both.
Or the likes. Or the likes.
Oh, how are our likes doing? 339 likes. Now, we were able to push it above 500 last week. Can we push it? Can we do 600 this week? Let's see if we can. So please, if you're having some fun, if you're relaxing, if you're taking a break because you're supposed to be on a Zoom call with someone else and you've just got the screen off, just do it, but make sure you hit like. All right, so I've got my chocolate here. I'm just gonna set that out of the way. And let's get into rolling our dough. So you want to dust your work area with a little flour, because remember, when you first start handling this dough, it will feel sticky, but once you get it rolled out there, because of the butter, you'll find it's easy to work with. So even because it's had 90 minutes to rise, the flour has absorbed some of the liquid. So this is not nearly as sticky as that dough I just put in the bowl. Compare the difference. It feels and looks completely different. I can handle this and it won't stick to my fingers where the other one obviously did. Here we go. Just a little dusting of flour on top. And now you want to roll this roughly into a 12 by 18 inch or 30 by 45 centimeter rectangle. You don't have to pull out the tape measure for it. Just make sure it's quite evenly rolled. I do like to shift my dough around. That way I just know I'm not getting a sticky spot anywhere on the work surface. I like to roll, the reason our kitchen counters are wooden is because I like to roll dough on wood. It holds an even temperature, where marble stays cool, and that's good for buttery pastries and when you're working with chocolate. But in general, wood is more even, and it's a nice smooth surface. So you can use a cutting board if you want. There we go. I think that's roughly 12 by 18. So when you're adding your filling, your butter and sugar filling, which you're looking at it now thinking that is a big surface area, that's not a lot of filling. It's not supposed to be terribly a lot of filling. So I dollop it on in little bits, but you will not get full coverage of this filling, unlike making a cinnamon bun. And as I mentioned, it's to help prevent a mess, but you get a nice balance of flavor, a little sweetness. And don't worry when you're spreading this dough or spreading your filling on the dough. If it stretches the dough a little bit, that's okay. Just work gently. Try not to put a hole in it if you can avoid it. Oh, hello from South Africa, Roxana. Thank you for joining us. And Pakistan, it's great to hear where everyone is from. And from Kuwait. And Taiwan, excellent. Oh, we're nearly at 500 likes. Okay, come on, we're getting close. We're trying to go for 600. So if you are just joining us, I am making a chocolate babka, and I'm in the middle of rolling out the dough, about to get to the best part, which is the rolling and filling and twisting it. But we want to get 500 likes on today's video. 600. 500. That's so last week. 600. So you can see I kind of pulled the dough a little bit as I was spreading the filling, but I'm just trying to get the big pieces of the filling out. But you don't have to have it completely covered. This babka dough gets twisted and rolled so many times that even though I have space on the outside, it will all get worked into the dough. So now it's time to sprinkle on the chocolate. And this is what I mean about having those crumbly pieces is nice. That way with every bite you get a little bit of chocolate, but not too much. Okay, now starting from one of the short sides, you want to roll it up. So this is very much like making a cinnamon bun. Now this is where the fun is. Grab the knife. And now what you need to do is cut this down the center lengthwise. And because this dough is so pliable and flexible, you're probably noticing how it's stretching as I roll it. This is a lot bigger than the 12 inches or 30 centimeters I started with. Now, who was asking? Sam wrote earlier and said, is there any way to do this without making a mess? Quite honestly, not really. You're gonna make a bit of a mess. And if you use a sticky filling or fresh fruits, it'll get stickier and messier, but we have to clean up anyhow, so we might as well. Now, you have an option. If you don't want tons of spiral twists in your bread, you can actually start twisting from this point. So what I do is I open up the two halves. So you don't want to leave them stuck together or there was no point in cutting them. And then you start overlapping like this. And you just start twisting, making sure to keep those the cut open parts upright. Or if you really want to go for the full twist, and I say we do it, we take a minute and we twist these up. So this also does help keep the filling in place a little bit. But just the stickiness of the dough works with it at this point. But you can see I'm not adding more flour to my work area. So now we've got two twists, and we're going to twist these twists. So more twisting. And so I just look at my center point, and I start twisting at the center. And the center, and the center. From the center out, and now I do the same working outwards. That way you're not starting from one side, and then you've got these big long ropes that you're making a mess with. And you can always retwist that dough. And now we've got one giant twist, and let's look at the pan we're going to bake this in. So you're thinking, well, how's this going to fit in this pan? We're going to twist it again. So now, and this is where your end pieces don't matter so much. We're going to cut it in half widthwise. And now I'm going to take this twist and twist them again. So that is, we've done the roll and then twist 1, 2, 3, 4 twists, maybe even 5. Now, because this one's shorter, you can just start twisting the whole thing, and you want to compact it at this point because you want to fit it into your pan. So let's take a second and talk about pan sizes. So the recipe calls for a 9 by 5 inch pan, but a lot of pan sizes can vary. Or maybe you have a fun and funky, beautiful pan, or maybe you have a vintage pan, and not all pans come in standard sizes. So you always want to, if you have a pan that you know fits your standard recipes, be it banana bread or a loaf like this, well, measure its volume and then you'll know how to work. So you've got two basic ways to measure volume. And if there are kids watching this good little Math 101 lesson, so the first way is the simplest way to measure volume, and that's simply to take a measuring cup, fill it with water, and keep track of how many milliliters you're adding until you reach the top of the pan. The other way, if you remember way back, is to calculate your volume, is you measure the length of the pan, the width of the pan, and the height of the pan. And you multiply all three, and if you calculate it in centimeters, that gives you the milliliter volume equivalent. So I measured this pan, which is 23 centimeters by 8 centimeters, and I forget how high it was, but it came out to 1.38 liters by volume. So that's the easiest way to calculate. And if you're trying to calculate a cylinder volume, it's pi r squared times the height. So you need to calculate the area, surface area of the circle, times the height, and that gives you the volume. So we weren't just making babka today, were we? There was a little test in the middle.
Isn't it milliliters to millimeters, I think?
Well, yeah, your hundreds and your thousands. So I came out with 1380. So then I moved my decimal points to 1.38 liters. So yes, that's a very good point. But the metric's so easy to convert by measure to volume because it's all based on the same scale of 10. All right, in we go. And here is the loaf. I've lined it with parchment paper so that way it's easy to pull out. And now this is where you can now, if you wanted to do this recipe a day ahead, you could put it into the fridge at this point and let it slowly proof in the fridge overnight. But you'll still have to let it come up to room temperature the next morning. But at room temperature, just like this, you give it 45 minutes. So in that time, you want to preheat your oven to 375 or 190 Celsius. How's everyone doing? Oh, yeah. Oh, you're feeling the math class vibes. Sorry, did I scare you there? No, but you can just walk away. How good. On a Friday, you're heading into the weekend. You just go, I just had a reminder of one of those simple math equations. If you really want to get into some serious math calculations, check out my live Yum 101 live croissant baking, because I get into discussion of the Pearson square, which is how to calculate fat content for your recipes. So that's when you're really ready for a math test. You work into that one. Baking with Leo's asking, can I use a glass loaf pan? You certainly can. Glass will, just keep an eye on the browning. It could change the browning time, and you may want to fiddle with your oven temperature. But the reason I like to start at 375 for this babka is because there's a lot of dough in here. And I want the heat to get evenly from the outside into the center of the loaf, so the yeast rises evenly. And I get a nice, evenly fluffy loaf from the outside in. So this loaf, after the 45 minutes, and I happen to have one, so let's compare. This is just assembled, and this is after 45 minutes. So it doesn't double in size, but it definitely grows to fill the pan. And I do like to put this on a baking tray because I don't feel like cleaning the bottom of my oven later on today. And then what I do is I bake this for 30 minutes at 375. And so that's getting the heat into it. But because of the sugar and because of the filling and the chocolate, I want to turn down the oven to 350 after that first 30 minutes so I don't over brown the top. It will turn a dark brown, but I don't want to burn it. And so that's why I turn the oven down and I let it go another 30 minutes, even 40 minutes. This is a loaf of bread that takes a long time to bake. Just because of its volume and the fillings, and you don't want to end up with a loaf that is raw in the middle. To check the doneness, now it will be very hot coming out of the oven. If you've had it in for 60 minutes, you'll be fine. But if you're not sure, you want to carefully tip the pan on its side, pull the parchment off, knock the bottom of the pan, and if it sounds hollow, then you know it's fully cooked right in the center. If it's not, if it has sort of a dull thud sound to it, tip it in the pan back in the oven. So long as you catch it within 5 minutes of it baking, coming out of the oven, you'll be fine. So I'm going to pop this one in. How are we doing on our like count? Oh, 548. Okay, we can do better. We're 2 under what we did last week, so we gotta get at least 2 more likes, but we're really aiming for 600 likes. So are you allowed to vote twice here? If you do, just hit like. We've got a good crowd joining us today. This is great. Now I wanna show you the baked result, but I wanna take a moment. Oh my gosh, someone's using my Black Forest cake recipe. Wow, good for you. There are a lot of moving parts in that recipe. Ooh, that would be a fun one to do as a live, but you're already doing it. Oh, everyone's writing so many questions. It's hard to keep up here. Oh, good question, Donald. Do you want to use a thermometer to monitor the internal temperature of the babka? I think that's a good idea. I would have to do some research to verify the temperature you need to hit there, because I think the sugar would potentially could throw off the temperature of what a done babka could be compared to, say, a regular white bread. So let me get back. That's an excellent question. Let me get back to you. I'll be back next week with an altogether different recipe. It's going to be a savory one. That's the hint for now. And it's with special thanks to Rolling Meadow Farms that I'm able to be here with these live streams and share these great recipes and get ideas from you. So here we are. I'm learning too. Okay, Bloop Cool 88. Yes, we did it. We got to 622. Woo, thank you everybody. That's awesome. Oh, Vishal, you're asking a great question about croissants with the butter leaking. So let me, quick answer. That answer in more complete detail is on my Yum 101 live croissant episode, because I get into detail. That is very, very common. When the butter leaks out, it's typically a sign of underproofing. And so that croissant dough needs to just rise that little bit more. But there's some great other tips that will help you know in your rolling and folding that you get to the point that you won't have that issue. Keats wants us to get to 900. That's an ambitious goal. Okay, we've got... Yes, Asenka, every Friday I'm doing a live for the next few weeks anyhow, hopefully more. And we've got a question about was looking egg substitutes. So I talked about the flax egg, which is great for cookies, muffins, quick breads, things like that. That is 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed and 3 tablespoons of warm water. Stir together, let it sit for a minute, and that is in place of an egg. And for breads like this, I would use 60 grams of silken tofu, lightly whisked in place of the egg measurement. And that also replaces the volume too. Oh, Binapani has a great idea. You could make this a pumpkin chocolate babka. So I'm going to bring over the babka that I already pulled out of the oven. So this one has already baked and cooled. The hardest part when it comes to a recipe like this, let me turn this around this way, is letting it cool because it smells so good. That combination of the butter with the cinnamon and the chocolate when this is baking, plus you've got the richness of the dough, is just so inviting, so welcoming. Cherry, you were saying, what's the best beverage to have with this? Definitely a cup of coffee or tea, whatever your favorite of the two is. But you do want to let it cool to room temperature. Because of the egg and the milk and the butter in the bread dough, it does stay fresh and soft for a few days. But you'll find you get a nice crust on the outside. I'm just going to bring my cutting board over, Michael, but I'll come back to it and bring it into shot. But if you cut a loaf of bread while it's still too hot, it will just squish and fall apart on you. Oh, look at that. You may get these slight little pieces from the twists kind of pull away, but that's part of the magic, you know, having those like a cinnamon bun. You pull away, you've got the bits with a bit of a crust on the outside, and then you've got that gorgeous twist in the middle. You've got the big pieces of chocolate, but then you've got the little pieces twisted in. Every slice is a little bit. I'm just going to keep slicing. This would make a fabulous French toast, wouldn't it? See, in this, the last slice, we had no cinnamon, but you flip it over. Oh, there's chocolate and cinnamon waiting for you. So it really is an amazing, delicious, bit of a decadent treat, but it's not over the top because it's sweet, but it's not sweet like a dessert sweet. And I'll put this over here so we can get our hero shot. Oh, this has been so much fun. I was really looking forward to making this recipe with you. And for you. Oh, that piece fell off. That must be mine. I'm going to take a last look at some of the questions here. Oh, here's a good one from Wajiha. Can I do a video on all essential beginner's baking tools? Oh, that's a good idea. I can certainly do that. Oh, Earl Grey. That would be delicious with this. TJ, or Sherry, I like your question. Or Cherry, maybe we'll hit 900 if I make a pizza dough? Could be, you never know. I'm always up for an adventure. Sue's having croissant issues, but we'll touch on that. Remember, you have great options. The minute TJ posts next week's live stream a day or two ahead, so look for it Wednesday or Thursday, you can start asking her questions because I will see them. And I love hearing from them. You know that, and I do my best to answer them all, including Idea, who was asking that they only have a 9-inch cake pan, but quite often you need, if you're doing a layer cake, you need 2 or even 3 layers. You can rotate the batter. Don't put it in the fridge, because that will change how the cake layers bake from the first to the third. So just leave the batter on the counter, bake each layer, usually it's about 30 minutes, let it sit for 15, tip it out, in with the next one. It makes for a full afternoon of baking, but it's passive baking, not active, so you should be okay. And here we go, hello from Serbia. And this is amazing. We are up to 660 likes. You are fantastic. And I hope you come back to see this video again. So if you came in late, or if you had to leave, you're clearly not seeing me now, but You can come back because within a few hours, this video will be posted on the OEM channel. You can count on brand new videos every Tuesday and Friday, and this has been an absolute thrill. I know Bonnie's excited because Friday afternoon means I'm coming over with something sweet, and today it's going to be this delicious chocolate babka. Thank you for joining me, everyone. Have a fabulous weekend, and I'll see you next Friday.